In order to best illustrate the difference between connotations and denotations, and clearly understand connotations, I'd like you to consider the difference between house and home. If I go to the dictionary and look both of these words up, what I'm going to find is that they have very similar denotations. They'll talk about a dwelling or building where families live. When I read the word house in a text, I visualize something like this. Going back to our discussion on the LMS, one of the points that was made is that connotations are personal and culturally constructed. And so, in my cultural context, this is what I picture when I read house. If this was your house, it's likely that you would call it your home and not house. To further illustrate the difference between house and home, I consider my impressions of home and the range of secondary meanings associated with home. For me, home includes warmth, security, family, all sorts of things that make one feel comfortable in the dwelling or building that they live in. To take a look at one additional example, I'd like you to consider when a government or a state confines an individual. There's a number of ways we can describe this, and what's more, how we describe it conjures up a range of secondary meanings associated with that word. Foremost, consider the word imprison. When we hear that one has been imprisoned, we know that they have been put in prison by the denotation, but we get impressions of jails, bars, a lonely cell, perhaps. Another word that means to confine or imprison is the word incarcerate, and this has a more institutional feel to it. So we have an entire body, bureaucracy, government, a cold building that confines the individual there. Another word that might effectively describe this confinement by the state is the word intern, and the connotations here likely include the Japanese internment in Canada, the internment of Jewish people in Europe, and the fact that this includes some sort of racial or political motivation on the part of the individuals that are being confined. And finally, we have the word detain, and in this case, we have the range of secondary meanings, including that it is a temporary state, that they are likely being questioned, and they're being held very, very short period of time. To conclude, we are often focusing on the secondary meanings associated with a word. And so if you're having difficulty identifying some of those secondary meanings, I suggest considering whether or not it has a positive or negative connotation. Ask yourself, does this give you a good feeling or a bad feeling when you hear this word? And I think about words like ambition, determined, perseverance are all the same as stubborn or obstinate. So consider how you feel when you hear that word, good or bad.